The pain was sudden, overwhelming, an explosion of sensations that took over his body like an uncontrollable electric current. Arthur Jensen felt his chest burn as the twisted metal of the car pressed against his ribs. There was a sharp crack. Something inside him had shattered, and then the world dissolved into darkness. There was no time to form a coherent thought, only a brief awareness that this was the end. The void that followed was not darkness, but an absolute silence, as if the entire universe had come to a halt. There was no pain, there was no fear, only the complete absence of everything. Then something changed. He couldn't explain how or why, but he was there again, not within his body, but somewhere else, outside of himself. Arthur opened his eyes, but what he saw was impossible. His own body lay motionless on a hospital stretcher, surrounded by doctors and nurses feverishly working to bring him back. The heart monitor displayed a straight line, emitting a continuous, agonizing sound. He should have been dead. Logic dictated that nothing existed beyond death, and yet there he was, conscious, lucid, observing the scene from an impossible perspective. An unknown feeling overwhelmed him, a mixture of fascination and disbelief. He looked at himself, but felt no connection with that injured body. It was like observing a broken object, a discarded shell. For the first time in his life, Arthur experienced the absolute certainty that he was more than just flesh and bone. Time seemed fluid. The hospital, the doctors, the equipment, all began to lose importance, as if they were becoming distant, irrelevant. Arthur realized that he wasn't merely standing there. He was moving, or rather, he was being carried. First, he floated gently upward, passing through the fluorescent lights of the emergency room as if they were mere illusions, feeling lighter than he had ever imagined possible. The city below grew smaller with every passing moment. The night lights flickered like fireflies, and a comforting silence replaced the noise and chaos of the physical world. There was no wind, no gravity. He felt neither weight nor fatigue, not even the limitations of a physical body. It was pure consciousness, traveling through a boundless space. Then, a perception came like a wordless whisper. He was not simply going somewhere. He was returning. The revelation struck him with an overwhelming impact. How could he recognize a destination to which he had never been? And yet, everything there seemed familiar. He felt that he belonged to that path, like a river returning to its source. What awaited him beyond? Arthur did not know, but for the first time in his existence, he did not fear the answer. The landscape around him began to transform. The darkness gave way to a golden, welcoming light, a light that did not hurt the eyes, but seemed to radiate a pure, vibrant energy. Arthur realized that he was not seeing with his eyes, but with something deeper, a perception that captured not only shapes and colors, but intentions, feelings, and hidden meanings in every fragment of light around him. He was not alone. Indistinct figures moved in the distance, shrouded in a subtle glow, like silhouettes made of pure energy. They did not speak, but Arthur felt their presence as waves of warmth, as if they were connected to him in a way that transcended any human bond. Every particle of this new world seemed to vibrate in harmony, as if it were alive, pulsing, in a rhythm he couldn't comprehend, yet filling him with absolute peace. Everything there appeared sharper, more real than anything he had ever experienced on Earth. The air not only existed, it emanated fragrances that evoked forgotten memories. The ground beneath his feet was not solid, yet he knew he could walk if he wished. And then, a thought surprised him. He felt no hunger, no thirst, no pain, no fear. There was no need for anything. He was simply himself, pure, whole, complete. For the first time in his life, Arthur experienced absolute freedom. Arthur was overcome by an instantaneous understanding, something that did not come in words, but as an absolute truth imprinted directly upon his consciousness. He was standing at the threshold of a world far greater than he could ever have imagined. It was not a dream, nor a hallucination of a dying mind. This place existed, always had existed, and was more real than anything he had ever experienced on Earth. He felt an irresistible pull to move forward, as if he were being called by something his soul recognized, even though his rational mind could not yet fully comprehend. With every step, everything around him seemed to respond to his very essence. The light vibrated with his thoughts. The forms around him shifted subtly, reflecting his own energy. Here, there were no masks, no disguises, no illusions, only the pure, crystalline truth of what each being truly was. And then, he saw them. Beings of indescribable beauty, approached, radiating a profound serenity. It was not a physical beauty, but something beyond appearance, a perfect harmony between light and consciousness, between presence and purpose. Arthur felt an inexplicable warmth inside him, a sense of belonging that made him realize he had never in all his earthly life experienced anything like it. The beings did not need to speak. Their thoughts reached him directly like a stream of pure knowledge intertwining with his own mind. They knew him. They knew everything about him, his doubts, his fears, his stubborn resistance to accept anything beyond science. And yet there was no judgment, only understanding and patience. Arthur wanted to ask so many things, but he realized that words were unnecessary. The answers were already there, unfolding within his mind like ancient memories being reawakened. He understood that life on Earth was merely a stage in something far greater, a process of learning and spiritual growth. Every choice, every action, every thought shaped the vibration of the soul, determining what would happen after physical death. There was no divine judgment in the human sense of the word, nor a celestial tribunal imposing arbitrary punishments. What existed was the undeniable truth. Those who lived in disharmony with love and compassion naturally drifted away from that light, falling into states of darkness and emptiness. Arthur understood that hell was not a place of fire and torment, but rather a state of profound loneliness, where souls trapped in their own shadows wandered until they were ready to seek the light again. He felt an immense clarity take hold of his consciousness. All the certainties he had clung to throughout his life, his rigid convictions, his belief that everything ended with death, crumbled before this vast, undeniable truth. And then, the final revelation came as a silent whisper within him. He had already been there before. This world was not strange, but familiar. This was his true home. Earthly life had been merely a brief journey, an interval between two much broader realities. The desire to remain overwhelmed him, a deep, almost painful yearning. But before he could move forward, he felt something pulling him back. The force pulling him back was irresistible, as if an invisible thread were attached to his essence, drawing him against his will. Arthur tried to resist, tried to cling to that world that now seemed to be his true home. But the beings around him conveyed a calm and firm thought. He had not yet fulfilled his mission. Something within him protested. Mission? What mission? He did not understand, but before he could form another question, he felt a violent tug, and everything around him began to fade. The light dissolved into shadows. The sublime peace was replaced by an overwhelming sense of crushing weight, an abrupt return to something dense and limiting. In an instant, paradise vanished. And then, there was a sound, a distant noise, like an echo coming from another world. Arthur Jensen opened his eyes. The intense glare of the hospital lights momentarily blinded him, and the pain returned in full force, tearing through every fiber of his being. The shrill sound of the heart monitor filled his ears, and human voices vibrated around him. He was back, But something inside him had changed forever. The experience he had lived could not be explained as an illusion, a delirium, or a trick of the mind. He knew this with a certainty that transcended logic. No matter how much the world around him appeared the same, he would never again be the man he once was. Death, which had once been his greatest mystery, was now merely a passage. And life, he realized, was much more than a biological accident. It was a journey of learning, a path of evolution. He had seen, he knew, and in some way, he needed to share this truth with the world. The sky was clear, blue and serene, yet Vincent Hensley paid no attention to the beauty surrounding him. He was focused on the dirt road winding along the mountainside as he drove his tractor with the precision of someone who had taken that route countless times. The engine roared loudly, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. Everything seemed normal until a small insect flew directly into his eye, causing him to lose his sight for an instant. That was enough. The tractor shuddered, veered off course, and began sliding downhill. In an instinctive reflex, Vincent tried to jump before it. Was too late. But fate had other plans. A sudden, brutal impact struck him from the side. Another uncontrolled vehicle hit him forcefully, hurling him to the ground like a rag doll. The pain was overwhelming. And then, everything went dark. There was no sound, no light, no sense of time. Only a deep, silent void. But then, something changed. Suddenly, Vincent realized that he was still conscious, but in a way he had never experienced before. He opened his eyes, or at least he felt as though he had realized that he was no longer on the mountain. The environment around him was of an indescribable beauty, radiating peace and harmony. Everything seemed to pulse with a living energy, as if the very space were aware. In front of him, figures of light approached. They were not familiar faces, yet somehow he felt that he knew them. A sensation of absolute love enveloped him, and he understood, without a word being spoken, that he was in paradise. Vincent felt enveloped by a peace so deep that any trace of fear simply vanished. The place he was in was not only beautiful, it was vibrant, pulsating, charged with an energy so pure that it permeated his very essence. There was no sun, yet everything seemed illuminated by a golden light that cast no shadows. The ground beneath his feet was both solid and soft, and the air carried a delicate fragrance, as if each particle held floral and woody notes, evoking memories he never knew he possessed. He looked at his own hands, expecting to see them injured by the accident, but they were perfect, youthful and stronger than they had ever been in his earthly life. Then, the luminous figures drew even closer. They did not need to speak. Their very presence communicated everything directly, as if transmitting pure thoughts without the need for words. Among them, Vincent perceived something impossible. He recognized those souls, not by their faces, for they had no defined features like those on earth, but through a deep connection, a bond that transcended any physical memory. A shiver ran through his consciousness as he realized who they were. His parents. He did not see them as the elderly figures they had been in their final days, but as radiant essences, whole and unmarked by time. The love they radiated was so intense that Vincent felt the urge to cry. But he realized that in that realm, tears did not exist. Suffering was not part of that reality. Vincent wanted to speak, to ask how all of this was possible, but he realized that words were unnecessary. Knowledge flowed directly into his consciousness, as if it had always been there, waiting to be remembered. He understood that life did not end with death, but expanded into something far greater. Earthly existence was merely a stage, a brief passage within an infinite journey. His mind, once so limited by the material world, now opened to an undeniable truth. Everything he thought he knew about life after death was wrong. There was no cruel judgment, nor arbitrary punishment, only a continuous path of learning. Then he noticed a new presence approaching, Unlike the others, this one radiated a golden light so intense that Vincent could hardly comprehend its form. An indescribable force emanated from it, not as an oppressive weight, but as an inexhaustible source of wisdom and love. When this entity communicated, it wasn't with a voice, but with a direct transmission of knowledge that struck his soul with profound impact. Vincent understood that it was not yet his time to remain. He had something to fulfill, something he had never imagined. He was meant to return and share the truth he had witnessed, but not with words. His mission would be conveyed through something he had never done before, through art. Vincent felt a wave of confusion sweep through his consciousness. Art? How could he share something through art when he had never held a paintbrush in his life? He was a farmer, not a painter. He had never had any creative inclination, never even attempted to draw. Doubt tried to infiltrate his mind, but the golden presence gave him an absolute certainty. He would not need to worry about technique or talent. Everything would be given to him at the right moment. His only task was to accept the call and allow the message to flow through him. And then, like a bolt slicing through the sky, Vincent felt a violent tug. Paradise began to dissolve around him, the vibrant colors fading like paint dripping on a canvas. The sensation of lightness and fulfillment was replaced by something dense, heavy, suffocating. He was falling, being pulled back to earthly existence. Suddenly, a brutal shock tore through his chest, and he opened his eyes with a stifled gasp. The pain returned like a crushing wave, burning every inch of his body. He was in a hospital. Machines beeped around him, voices mingled in a whirlwind of disjointed sounds. The doctors looked surprised, some exchanging incredulous glances as if his survival were a miracle. But Vincent barely noticed them. His heart pounded not from the pain, but from the memory of what he had seen, of what he had felt. No matter how real the world around him seemed, he knew that this was not his true home. He had been in a place beyond human comprehension, and now he carried a purpose that would change his life forever. The following days were marked by a slow and painful recovery, yet Vincent paid little attention to his physical condition. His mind was consumed by the experience he had lived and the mission entrusted to him. How could he fulfill something so impossible? He had never held a paintbrush, never felt the slightest inclination for art. Yet, the sense that something within him had changed never left him. Then, one night, while he was alone in the hospital, an irresistible force took hold of his hands. It was as if an invisible energy were guiding each of his movements. He did not question it. He simply yielded. He grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil and began to draw compulsively. Lines flowed effortlessly, taking shape as if they had a life of their own. When he finished, his eyes widened. Before him was the exact image of the place he had visited. In the following days, the need to create intensified. As soon as he was discharged from the hospital, Vincent bought paints and canvases, driven by something that went beyond his own will. He would sit for hours, lost in painting, his hands moving as if they already knew exactly what to do. When he looked at his finished works, he was stunned. He was not merely depicting ordinary landscapes. His paintings captured the grandeur of paradise, with colors that seemed to vibrate and convey emotions that words could never describe. People who saw his paintings were hypnotized, feeling an inexplicable peace, as if something within them were being touched by a forgotten memory. And then Vincent understood. His mission was not only to share what he had seen, it was to awaken in others the memory of that which deep down everyone already knew. Over time, Vincent realized that his paintings were not just visual representations of a sacred place. They carried an energy that touched people in inexplicable ways. Visitors wept when they saw his works, feeling a deep connection to something beyond the material world. Some said that upon viewing his canvases, they recalled ancient dreams, sensations of a distant home they had never known how to name. Others reported an immense peace, as if something within them had been healed. Vincent now understood that his mission was not merely to create art, but to serve as a bridge between two worlds, bringing a spark of paradise to those still walking on Earth. He never considered himself an artist in the conventional sense, nor did he ever seek recognition or fame. His only desire was to fulfill the task entrusted to him and prepare people for what would come after life. He spent the rest of his days painting and sharing his experience, not as a fantastical story, but as an undeniable truth that must be remembered. For Vincent, the greatest lesson his journey had taught him was clear. Death was not the end, but merely a return home, and those who lived their lives without preparing for that transition were wasting precious time. In the end, each of us will have to face the truth. He only hoped that through his art, he could help some see it before it was too late.